The year was 1874, and the docks of Portsmouth were restless under a gray morning sky. Masts swayed like a forest of skeletal giants, rigging groaned in the salt wind, and sailors barked curses while barrels rolled across the worn planks. Among them stood Elias Crow, a young man with eyes sharper than his years, his boots planted firmly, though the air reeked of coming rain. He pulled his coat tight against the chill, staring at the ship he was about to entrust with his life. The Dauntless. She was no beauty. Her hull bore scars from countless voyages, and the figurehead of a woman, once elegant, had her nose chipped away by cannon fire from some forgotten battle. But her sails were fresh-stitched, her guns oiled, and her reputation whispered of survival. In waters that had claimed finer vessels, Elias adjusted the sextant slung at his side. He had dreamed of this moment for years, his first true voyage as navigator. Yet excitement gnawed with unease. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay not just adventure, but answers. His father, Captain Abram Crow, had vanished on a sea quest years before, swallowed by a storm no man could name. His last journal, recovered by a trader, spoke of a map that shifts with the tides and of a crown that commanded the sea itself. Madness, perhaps, but Elias had memorized every word as he studied the rigging. A rasping laugh broke through the bustle. An old sailor, cloaked in oilskin, leaned against a post. His hair was a tangled white mess, his eyes fogged, but sharp enough to unsettle. "You there," the old man croaked, pointing a bony finger. "Navigator, eh? Best turn your boots around. The sea knows your bloodline. The storm waits for crows." Elias stiffened. "I don't know you, old man. You don't have to." The sailor shuffled closer, voice lowering to a hiss. "There. Our places men were never meant to sail. Places that wake when greedy hands pry too deep. Mark me, the sea does not forgive." Before Elias could answer, a boatswain's whistle shrieked. "All hands aboard. Captain Hargreaves wants no delay." The old sailor faded back into the throng, muttering what sounded like a prayer. Elias forced his shoulders square and strode up the gangplank, refusing to look back. The voyage begins. Captain Jonathan Hargreaves was a broad-shouldered man with iron-gray whiskers and eyes like cold steel. His authority needed no words. His mere presence silenced the crew. "Set your minds, lads," he barked as the Dauntless pulled from harbor. "This is no pleasure run. We sail for waters uncharted, guided by secrets men died to keep. Keep discipline, and we'll see the gold fill our holds. Slack, and the sea will have you." The men cheered, but the cheer was thin. Rumors already drifted among them. Spanish treasure, cursed gold, a crown of the deep. Elias kept to his charts, but his pulse quickened. Could it be his father's trail they followed? The days passed with the rhythm of ropes and sails, of shouted orders and creaking timbers. Elias traced the stars each night, charting their course beyond common routes. Yet with every degree they sailed west, unease grew. Birds fell dead on deck one morning, wings stiff as boards. The compass spun in frantic circles, mocking his calculations. At night, a phosphorescent glow shimmered across the waves. Not the green flicker of plankton, but shaped spirals, symbols that pulsed like veins of a living thing. The crew muttered. Superstition took root. Even the seasoned hands began to glance nervously at the sky, where clouds gathered too fast, too thick. The storm by the 6th week, the horizon blackened with a fury Elias had never seen. Clouds towered like mountains, lightning clawed through their bellies, and the wind howled with a voice that seemed alive. The Dauntless creaked and groaned as if protesting her fate. "Stormfront, all hands." Came the cry. Men scrambled up the rigging, reefing sails, while others lashed barrels and cannon to the deck. The ocean rose in heaving walls of black water. Rain lashed like stones. Elias gripped the railing, his sextant useless now. He saw fear in every face, the grizzled gunner with scars down his neck, the boy barely 16 clutching a coil of rope, all reduced to pale shadows under the storms. Wrath, a wave taller than a house, crashed over the deck. Men screamed as water swept across, dragging one sailor into the abyss. Another's arm snapped against a spar with a sickening crack. "Hold the lines." Captain Hargreaves roared, his voice carrying like thunder. "Ride her through." Elias stumbled to the ropes, hauling with others, muscles burning as the sails threatened to tear free. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos faces contorted with effort, spray blinding their eyes, veins bulging as they pulled against the ocean's might. And then he saw it. Out beyond the breakers, where the lightning danced, a figure walked upon the waves. Tall, cloaked in shadow, with eyes like distant stars. It raised no hand, spoke no word, yet Elias felt its gaze pierce him, colder than death. For a moment he forgot the ropes in his hands. The sea roared, and the figure vanished into the storm. The Dauntless plunged, her bow nearly swallowed. But she did not break. Slowly, agonizingly, she clawed her way through the black maw of waves. Hours bled into eternity. When at last the storm began to ease, the survivors slumped where they stood, too exhausted even to cheer. The deck was littered with broken timbers, blood, and silence. The sea hissed in the darkness, deceptively calm once more. Elias stared into the black horizon, his breath ragged. The image of the watcher on the waves would not leave him. Was it real? A trick of lightning and fear? Or had the old sailor's warning already come true? Somewhere deep inside, Elias knew this storm was only the beginning. The morning after the storm felt like waking from a nightmare, yet its marks lingered everywhere. The deck of the Dauntless was scarred, splintered planks, torn sails, and the gaps where men had once stood. 17 souls had been lost in the eye. Night, swallowed by the black water dot, the crew moved like wraiths, eyes hollow, shoulders bent under exhaustion. Even the wind had stilled, as if the sea itself watched in silence. Elias wiped salt from his face, his knuckles raw from hauling lines. But his mind clung only to one thing, the figure he had seen walking the waves. He said nothing. To speak it aloud would be to give it form, and already the men muttered of omens. Fractures in command, Captain Hargreaves stood firm at the quarterdeck, issuing orders with his usual iron tone. Yet Elias noticed the men no longer obeyed with the same snap. Doubt had crept into their bones. That evening, while the cook's meager stew boiled, whispers filled the mess. "This voyage is cursed," grumbled Gower, a thick-set sailor with a scarred lip. "We lose 17 men, and for what? Chasing shadows? Not a coin in the hold to show." Another spat into the bucket. "Aye, and the compass goes mad as a drunkard. The sea don't want us here." Elias pretended to study his charts, though his ears strained. Gower leaned closer to his mates. "Mark me, the captain knows more than he says. He speaks of gold, but his eyes see something else. I'll not die for his secrets." The murmurs grew. Elias's stomach clenched. He had sensed the truth. Hargreaves was steering them by something more than the stars. The captain's secret curiosity gnawed at Elias until he could not resist. Late that night, when the crew slumbered in hammocks, he stole to the captain's. Quarters. The door creaked open, and moonlight washed over maps, pinned to the walls. Maps not of any charted seas. They showed coastlines twisted, shifting, with markings scrawled in ink that blurred like water stains. At the desk lay a leather-bound journal. Elias's breath caught. He knew the handwriting. It was his father's. Hands trembling, he opened the book. The pages were filled with sketches of waves curling into monstrous faces, diagrams of ancient runes, and notes of a crown of Leviathan said to command storms and beasts alike. His father had written of a voyage years past following. Whispers of this artifact. One passage chilled him. The sea does not yield its crown freely. It calls a price of blood, and only those of the bloodline marked will find it. Elias slammed the book shut, heart racing. His father had sought the crown and died for it. And now Hargreaves was steering them along the same path. Find something of interest, boy? Elias spun. The captain stood in the doorway, shadowed, his hand resting on the hilt of his cutlass. I couldn't sleep, Elias stammered. Hargreaves's eyes flicked to the journal. His jaw tightened. That book is not yours. It was my father's. Elias swallowed. You knew him, didn't you? The silence between them was heavy as ballast. Finally, Hargreaves said, Abram Crow was a damned fool. He sought the crown as others before him, and the sea claimed him. But he left a trail, one I intend to finish. And you'd sacrifice all these men for it? Elias shot back. The captain's gaze hardened. They sail for gold. I sail for power. Do not forget your place, boy. Elias clenched his fists, but he lowered his eyes. For now, the curse takes whole days bled into nights. The sea turned strange again, calm when it should rage, boiling when it should rest. Shadows darted beneath the waves, too large for fish, too silent for whales. Once, Elias swore he saw a tentacle brush the surface, slick and pale, before vanishing. Crew grew restless. Meals shrank as stores dwindled, rats gnawed through sacks of flour, and thirst cracked lips. The whispers hardened into venom. One evening, Gower stood before the men, his voice carrying across the deck. We follow a madman into the abyss. 17 good sailors dead, and he drives us farther still. Do any of you see gold? Do you smell it? No, we smell only death. The men roared their agreement. Captain Hargreaves strode forward, pistol at his belt. Silence, dog. You'll not spread rot among my crew. But Gower was not cowed. Your crew? Nay, these men are no longer yours. You'll steer us into the grave. Best you join the ones already beneath it. And with that, mutiny exploded. The deck of Bloodsteel clashed in the lantern glow. Sailors loyal to Hargreaves fought those siding. With Gower, fists, cutlasses, and belaying pins turned the deck into chaos. Elias ducked a wild swing, stumbling across the boards. He had never raised a blade in earnest, but survival burned hotter than fear. Snatching a loose spar, he swung hard, cracking an attacker's jaw. The storm chose that moment to awaken. Wind howled, tearing through rigging, rain hammering down like nails. The ship lurched violently, throwing men against the rails. Through the frenzy, Elias saw Gower and Hargreaves collide, cutlass against cutlass, pistol against knife. Their duel raged while men screamed and fell around them. A cry rang out. The sea. Look to the sea. All eyes turned. A whirlpool yawned ahead, vast as a canyon, its maw sucking the ocean into a spiraling abyss. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating cliffs rising on its far side, an island that did not exist on any map. The Dauntless was already being dragged toward it. Man the lines. Hargreaves bellowed, but his voice was drowned by this roar of water. Elias clung to the railing as the ship spun, dragged into the vortex. His stomach lurched, the world turning end over end. Men were flung screaming into the depths. Through the spray, Elias glimpsed statues carved into the island's cliff serpents, their eyes glowing faintly, as though alive. The whirlpool dragged them closer, closer, until with a deafening crack, the Dauntless slammed against black rocks. Masts splintered, sails tore, and men were hurled like ragdolls. Darkness swallowed Elias. Stranded, he awoke on wet sand, lungs burning, body bruised. Waves lapped at his boots, dragging wreckage ashore. Around him, survivors coughed and groaned. Perhaps 20 men remained. The Dauntless lay broken on the rocks, her proud hull split. Smoke rose from her shattered timbers. Elias staggered upright, every muscle screaming. He looked inland and his breath caught. Before them rose ruins of a forgotten civilization. Black stone temples jutted from the cliffs, carved with serpents coiled around tridents. Strange glyphs glowed faintly in the cracks, pulsing like veins. The sea's whispers filled his ears again, low and insistent. He knew then with dreadful certainty, this was where his father had come. This was where the crown of Leviathan waited dot, and the sea would demand its price. The survivors of the Dauntless gathered on the black sand beach, their faces drawn, their clothes tattered, and their eyes reflecting the horror of what they had endured. Smoke drifted from the wreck, its broken hull groaning as waves battered. It further against the rocks. Captain Hargreaves stood among them, bleeding from a cut across his brow, but unbowed. He spoke with the authority of a man who refused to yield, even with death breathing down his neck. "We are not finished," declared. "The sea may strip us of ship and stores, but we yet have hands, and so long as men live, we endure." Some murmured agreement, but most faces bore only emptiness. Elias felt the weight of exhaustion crush his shoulders, yet something deeper burned inside him, an urgency he could not explain. The island called to him, its cliffs etched with monstrous carvings, its shadows whispering secrets his blood seemed to recognize. Exploring the shore, they scoured the wreckage for what they could salvage. Barrels of salted pork, half-cracked, soaked flour sacks, a handful of pistols, and 2 working muskets. With ropes and splintered spars, they dragged what remained up the sand. Elias noted that the island was not silent. Strange cries echoed from the jungle, inland half-bird, half-human, distorted by distance. Shapes moved among the trees, too, quick to define. And always the tide pulled unnaturally strong, as though the ocean hungered for their return. When dusk bled across the horizon, the men lit a fire. Shadows danced across their faces as they huddled close. "Best not linger here," muttered Bram, a wiry sailor with hollow cheeks. "This island reeks of death." "Death?" scoffed First Mate Dorian, tall and broad-shouldered, his blonde hair plastered with salt. "I see no death. I see fortune. These ruins," he jabbed a finger toward the cliffs, "reek of treasure. Gold enough to buy a king's crown." Elias felt the sting of the words. A crown, but not of gold. Of Leviathan. The Temple of the Deep at dawn. Hargreaves ordered a party inland. Elias, Dorian, and 8 others followed the captain through the jungle. The foliage grew impossibly thick, vines like serpents, flowers reeking of rot. Insects whined ceaselessly. The path rose steadily, leading to the cliffs. Soon they stood before an immense stairway carved from black stone, rising into shadow. Glyphs ran along its sides, glowing faintly as if alive. "God's blood," whispered a sailor. "Who carved this?" Elias traced the runes with his fingers. They thrummed beneath his skin, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. His father's journal had sketched these very symbols. They told of a covenant between men and the sea, a pact sealed by sacrifice. The stairs led them to a temple half submerged in a lagoon. Its pillars leaned as though bowed by centuries, yet its entrance gaped wide, a mouth swallowing light. Inside, the air was damp and heavy. Carvings lined the walls, serpents coiling around ships, storms spiraling from crowns. Statues of faceless guardians loomed, their stone eyes glittering. And there, upon an altar of obsidian, rested the thing Elias knew they had come for, the crown of Leviathan, forged of black metal and coral. Its points twisted like spines, its center gem pulsed with a faint blue glow, like a heart still beating. The men froze in awe. "It's real," breathed Dorian, eyes blazing. "By all the devils, it's real." Captain Hargreaves stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "With this, the seas will kneel, storms will bow, empires will crumble before the power of those who wield it." But Elias felt a cold dread coil around his chest. His father's journal had been clear the crown was no gift. It was a prison key, and whoever wore it bound himself to the abyss. The betrayal. As Hargreaves reached for the crown, a shot rang out. The captain jerked, blood blooming across his chest, and fell to his knees. The smoke drifted from Dorian's pistol. His eyes gleamed with madness. "The sea will kneel," Dorian growled, striding forward. "But not to you, old man. To me." The crew shouted, some drawing blades, others frozen in shock. Dorian seized the crown with both hands, raising it. High, the blue gem flared, and the temple trembled. A low rumble shook the lagoon outside. Water surged unnaturally, waves slapping against the stone. From the depths rose a sound, a roar, or perhaps a scream that made Elias's bones ache. "Fool!" Elias cried. "You've doomed us all." Dorian set the crown upon his brow. His body convulsed, veins glowing with the same blue light, his scream echoing with both agony and triumph. Outside, the sea erupted, the awakening a colossal shape tore free from the depths. Tentacles, slick and monstrous, writhed from the waves, each as thick as a mast. Eyes vast and lidless glared with hunger. The Leviathan had awoken. The men screamed. One sailor fled, only to be seized by a tentacle and crushed like a doll. Another tried to fire his musket, but the weapon misfired in the damp air. The temple quaked, stones tumbling from the ceiling. Elias grabbed a fallen pistol, firing at Dorian, but the bullet ricocheted harmlessly off the crown's glow. Dorian laughed, his voice now layered with something inhuman. "I am master of the sea?" he bellowed. He raised his arms, and the Leviathan's tentacles smashed against the cliffs, tearing stone apart like driftwood. "Not master, Elias," shouted over the din. "Slave, the crown binds you to it." For a heartbeat, Dorian's face faltered. Then rage consumed him. Lies, Elias's mind raced. He could not fight brute strength, but cunning. Yes, his father had written of the crown's hunger, that it demanded its wearer's soul. If Dorian's greed could be turned against him. He scrambled across the altar, dodging falling debris, and shouted, "Prove it then. Command it to give. You its treasure, if you are its master." Dorian sneered, raising his arms. "Leviathan, bring me your gold." The monster's eyes glowed. A tentacle whipped down, wrapping not around Elias, but around Dorian himself. The first mate screamed as he was lifted, crushed in the beast's grasp. The crown burned against his skull, fusing into his flesh. His cries twisted into a gargling wail as the Leviathan dragged him into its maw. The temple convulsed. Statues shattered. The crown fell from Dorian's broken head as he disappeared into the abyss. Elias seized it, the metal burning his palms. The gem pulsed frantically, alive, desperate to bind itself again. "Run!" he shouted. Flight from the island. The survivors fled the temple as waves rose higher, smashing against the cliffs. The lagoon boiled as the Leviathan thrashed, tearing. Stone apart, Elias sprinted with the crown clutched to his chest, every step pounding with the beast's roars. Behind him, the temple collapsed, swallowed by the sea. They reached the beach as the island itself began to crack. Water poured through, fissures dragging ruins beneath the waves. "The boats!" cried Bram. They shoved shattered planks into a crude raft, scrambling aboard as the tide pulled with monstrous force. as they pushed off. Elias looked back. The cliffs were sinking, statues vanishing, the jungle swallowed whole. The Leviathan writhed, its eyes blazing, its form too vast to comprehend. And then, with a final shudder, it sank into the deep, dragging the island into nothingness. Only the crown in Elias's hands remained, its glow pulsing faintly, as if mocking him. The raft drifted for days, a patchwork of splintered planks lashed with rope, carrying what little remained of the Dauntless. Salt spray crusted the survivors' lips, and hunger gnawed their bellies. The sun burned by day, the cold cut by night. Yet, worse than thirst or hunger was the weight Elias carried. The crown of Leviathan rested inside a canvas bundle at his side, pulsing faintly like the heart of some slumbering beast. Each night he heard it whisper, not in words, but in lures. Promises of calm seas, of unending riches, of dominion over all who dared sail. Once, when Bram reached for the bundle, Elias struck his hand away, his own voice strangely harsh. "Don't touch it." The other men gave him wary looks, as though they already feared the thing was changing him, and in truth, it was. He felt the pull of it every moment, a tide inside his veins. A sea that would not rest in the seventh night. The horizon blackened again. Clouds towered like mountains, lightning clawing through their bellies. The wind rose in shrieking gusts, and the raft pitched on growing waves. "Not another storm," moaned Bram, clutching the lashings. Elias knew better. This was no ordinary tempest. The Leviathan had been denied, its crown stolen. The sea itself raged to claim it back. Rain hammered them, turning the raft into a plaything. The survivors clung with bleeding hands, knuckles white. Waves crashed, nearly tearing them loose. Above, the sky split open in white fire, and then it rose. The Leviathan, drawn by the crown, erupted from the depths. Tentacles as thick as towers, coiled upward, its eyes glowing with eternal hunger. It loomed above them, a mountain of flesh and fury. The men screamed, "It's here for the crown!" Elias shouted, barely audible over the storm, "It will never stop unless it's destroyed." The choice lightning illuminated the faces around him, gaunt, hollow, resigned. No one moved to take the crown. No one dared. It had chosen him, or perhaps cursed him. He untied the canvas bundle, the metal burning his skin as he held it. The whispers grew louder, frantic, desperate. "Keep me, wield me, and I will make you master of the sea." His father's voice echoed in memory. The crown does not serve, it consumes. The raft buckled as a tentacle slammed beside them, flinging men into the black waters. Elias's heart wrenched as Bram disappeared beneath the waves, his cry cut short. The survivors were finished. Unless one act could end it. Elias's gaze shot upward. Lightning split the sky, striking the sea mast high. The crown thrummed. In his grip, hungry for the storm dot, if he bound it to the sky's fury. He lashed the crown to the broken spar of the raft with trembling hands, his jaw clenched against the voices screaming in his skull. "If you want power, then take it." He roared into the gale. The shattering the Leviathan surged closer, its maw opening wide. Tentacles whipped toward the raft, ready to drag them all into oblivion. And then lightning struck. The bolt tore from the heavens, blinding white, searing the crown in a blaze of fury. For an instant, time froze. The gem shattered with a scream. That was not of this world. A wave of energy exploded outward, blasting the raft apart. The Leviathan shrieked, its eyes boiling with blue fire as its tentacles writhed in agony. Cracks of light split across its body, and then, with a roar that shook the very sea, it dissolved into mist, vanishing into the depths from which it came. The storm died with it. The clouds tore open, revealing a calm sky streaked with dawn. The sea lay still, as if exhausted, But the raft was gone. The last survivor, Elias, floated on a single plank, waves rocking him gently. The crown was gone, shattered, its pieces scattered to the deep. His body ached. His clothes clung like lead, but he was alive. For 2 days he drifted, delirious with thirst and hunger. He clutched one thing only, his father's journal, miraculously, bound tight against his chest when the raft broke. On the third morning, a sail appeared. A merchant brig spotted him adrift and hauled him aboard. The sailors whispered when they saw his half-dead frame, his wild eyes, but they offered bread and water, and he wept as he ate. When they asked what had happened, he said only, "A storm." Epilogue. The hunger of the sea. Weeks later, Elias stood once more on solid ground, staring at the sea from the harbor cliffs. To others, it seemed peaceful, the waves rolling lazy and calm. But he knew better. The sea was no friend. It was no enemy either. It was alive, vast, hungry, eternal. And though the crown was gone, its whispers lingered still, in the hiss of waves and the rumble of storms. He opened his father's journal one last time, reading the words scrawled on its final page. The sea grants nothing freely. It only lends, and one day it will return to claim its due. Elias closed the book and turned from the water. He would live with the sea's hunger forever, but he had learned its truth. Power was no crown, no gem. Power was survival. Behind him, gulls screamed. Before him, the ocean stretched endless and unknowable. And in its depths, somewhere far below, the Leviathan stirred in restless dreams.